Middle-earth was a land of beauty and sorrow, a realm where the footsteps of elves lingered long upon its soil. Yet despite their deep love for its forests, rivers, and mountains, the elves could not remain. Their departure was not merely a choice, it was woven into the very fabric of Arda, bound by fate, by doom, and by the long echoes of a sorrow that had begun in the elder days. And so, the ships set sail from the grey havens, their white sails vanishing beyond the western horizon. Why could they not stay? Why were the elves destined to leave Middle-earth behind? To understand this, we must look deep into their history, into the burden they carried, and the call they could not resist. The story of the elves began in the starlit years of the First Age, when they awoke beside the waters of Cuivanen. There, under the watchful eyes of the stars, they were first known to the Valar, the great powers of the world. The summons of the Valar came swiftly. The elves were to leave the darkened lands of Middle-earth and journey to Aman, the undying lands, where they would dwell in bliss. Many obeyed, and these became the Eldar, the High Elves, who would shape much of the world's fate. But not all followed the summons, and even among those who did, a restless yearning for Middle-earth remained, one that would lead to tragedy and exile. When the Noldor, the mightiest of the elven kindreds, left Aman in the year of the trees 1495 to pursue Morgoth and reclaim the stolen Silmarils, they did so in defiance of the Valar. Their rebellion bound them to Middle-earth with blood and sorrow, and though some repented, the doom of Mandos lay upon them, ensuring that their fate was sealed. The elves of Middle-earth, even those who had never set foot in Valinor, were subject to the slow decay of time. Unlike men, who were given the gift of death, the elves were bound to Arda itself, and with each passing age the world changed around them while they remained. This was a burden, not a blessing, for as the ages passed, the lands they loved would wither, and the shadow of the past would grow heavy upon their hearts. Yet the elves did not flee Middle-earth out of weakness. They were warriors, builders, and poets, standing against the darkness even when all seemed lost. In the Second Age, they founded mighty realms, Lindon, Eregion, and later Rivendell, seeking to preserve beauty in a world that ever fell into ruin. But they knew that their time was measured. The forging of the Rings of Power in the Second Age, culminating in the treachery of Sauron and the creation of the One Ring in the year 1600, was a turning point. The elves, wise and foresighted, resisted his dominion, yet the very magic they wielded to sustain their lands became a chain that bound them. As long as the Three Rings endured, the elves could slow the decay of the world, but they could not halt it. And should the One Ring be destroyed, their power would fade, and with it, their ability to resist the slow erosion of time. It was in the Third Age, in the year 3021, that the last High Elves departed Middle-earth, marking the end of their dominion. The destruction of the One Ring meant the loss of the Three, and with them the last enchantments that kept Middle-earth from slipping further into the hands of mortality. Rivendell, Lothlorien, and the Grey Havens, places of light and wisdom, would diminish, and the elves who remained would dwindle, their numbers growing fewer until they were but a whisper on the wind. And so they sailed westward, not to escape, but to return, to the land where their spirits longed to be, the place from which they had come and to which they had always belonged. The sea longing that stirred within the hearts of the elves was no mere desire for adventure. It was a call that echoed from the very depths of their being, a reminder of their true home beyond the circles of the world. It was first kindled when the Eldar beheld the light of the two trees in Valinor, and even those who had never walked its shores carried the memory of it in their spirits. This longing, called the sea yearning in the tongues of the Eldar, was not easily resisted. Legolas himself, though bound by friendship and duty, felt its pull when he heard the gulls cry upon the shores of Pelagia, and he knew that one day he too must depart. This was the fate of all elves who tarried long in Middle-earth, for the world of men was not meant to be theirs forever. But there was another reason the elves could not remain: the slow, inexorable fading of their kind. Unlike men whose lives burned brightly and were swiftly extinguished, Elves were bound to Arda until its very end, and yet, though they did not die as men did, they were not unchanging. As the ages passed, their presence in the world grew more tenuous, their power waned, and their realms, no matter how fair, could not escape the tide of time. The elves did not age as mortals did, but they could fade, and this was a doom they could not escape. The world that had once been full of their song and laughter was now a place of shadow and ruin, and in it they had no lasting place. It is said that the burden of sorrow weighed heavily upon them, for the elves were creatures of memory. They did not forget as men did, and with each passing year their minds were filled with the echoes of things lost. Friends who had perished, lands that had fallen to ruin, glories that had faded. Middle-earth was no longer the land they had once known. The great forests diminished, the mighty cities of their past, Gondolin, Nargothrond, Doriath, were long buried beneath time's relentless tide. Even Lothlorien, the fairest of all realms in the Third Age, could not stand unchanged. As Galadriel herself said, "Together through ages of the world we have fought the long defeat." And though the elves did not despair, as men might, they understood that their fight against the decay of time was one they could never truly win. The departure of the elves was not an escape, nor was it a retreat from the affairs of Middle-earth. It was the fulfillment of their doom. When Frodo bore the One Ring to Mount Doom and saw it cast into the fire, he did not merely unmake Sauron's dominion. He also shattered the last great works of elven preservation. The Three Rings, though untouched by Sauron's hand, had been bound to the fate of the One. With its destruction, the last remnants of elven enchantment in Middle-earth began to fade. No longer could the Eldar hold back the march of time. Rivendell, the refuge of lore and wisdom, would diminish. Lothlorien, the Golden Wood, would wane. And the Grey Havens, where so many had gathered to depart, stood now as the final gateway to the undying lands. So it was that, in the year 3021 of the Third Age, the last voyage of the Keepers of the Three Rings set forth. Elrond, Galadriel, and Gandalf himself, counted among the wise, though not of the Eldar, took ship and sailed into the west, bearing with them Frodo and Bilbo Baggins. It was an end, and yet not an end. For though Middle-earth would see the elves no more in great number, their legacy remained, woven into the very fabric of the world. And as the White Ship passed beyond the sight of mortals, a new age dawned. The Age of Men, where the works of elves would become legend, and their songs would fade into whispers upon the wind. Yet not all elves heeded the call of the sea, and some remained in Middle-earth, lingering as shadows of their former selves. Though their numbers dwindled, scattered kindred still walked beneath the stars, dwelling in quiet glades or hidden halls, reluctant to forsake the lands they had long loved. Thranduil and his folk remained in the forests of the north, keeping their watch beneath the eaves of Greenwood, though it too would change as time wore on. In Rivendell, a few may have tarried, though without Elrond's wisdom, its halls would no longer shine with the same light of ages past. Círdan the Shipwright, the eldest of the Morroquindi, still kept watch at the Grey Havens for a time, awaiting the last of his kin who might yet seek passage across the sea. But for those who lingered, time would become a slow and heavy burden. The lands of Middle-earth, once filled with their voices, would grow strange to them. The rise of men, the forging of new kingdoms, the slow march of change, these were things they could not halt. Without the rings to sustain them, without the presence of their mightiest lords and ladies, those who remained would diminish. It is said that in the deep places of the world, some of the Eldar faded into mere memory, becoming no more than echoes of their former selves, bound to the places where they had once lived, unseen by mortal eyes. And what of Valinor, the land to which they sailed? It was not an escape from the world, but a return to the place from which they had once departed. In the uttermost west, beyond the reach of mortal sorrow, the elves would find healing, though not forgetfulness. Their wounds, long borne, would mend, and the weight of ages would lift from their hearts. For Elrond, it was a homecoming long delayed, a reunion with those whom he had left behind. For Galadriel, it was the end of a long exile, for she, alone among the keepers of the three, had been among the rebels who had once defied the Valar. But for Frodo and Bilbo, mortals who had been granted passage, it was something else entirely. A gift, an easing of their burdens before the final fate of men claimed them at last. Though the ships passed beyond sight, the memory of the elves did not vanish from Middle-earth. Their works remained, hidden in forgotten places, their songs still whispered by the wind. In the towers of Gondor, the deeds of the Eldar were recorded, their histories kept by those who still cherished the memory of the elder days. And in the hearts of those who had known them, the longing for their presence endured. The beauty they had brought into the world could not be undone, nor could their passing be wholly mourned, for in leaving, they had fulfilled the path set before them from the very beginning. Thus ended the great tale of the elves in Middle-earth, not in war or ruin, but in quiet departure. They had come with the first light of the stars, and now they faded as the world of men took its place. Yet in the west, beyond the setting sun, their song continued, and the white shores of Aman stood ever open to those who had not yet found their way home. And so the world moved on. The Fourth Age began, an age where the affairs of elves were but a distant memory, fading into the mists of legend. Men who had once stood in awe of the Eldar now ruled over lands that had been shaped by their hands, but would never again hear their voices in great number. Gondor and Arnor, under the rule of King Elisar, flourished for a time. Yet even Aragorn, the last great elf friend of Middle-earth, knew that his people walked upon the threshold of a world forever changed. The days of magic and wonder had passed, and the slow dimming of Middle-earth had begun. Yet even as the elves departed, their legacy endured. In the white tree of Gondor, whose seed had come from the hands of the Eldar, a living memory of Númenor and of the West remained. In the deep places of the world, where the roots of mountains touched the bones of the earth, echoes of their voices could still be heard, if one knew how to listen. And in the forgotten paths of the wild, there were those who claimed that sometimes, in the hush of twilight, a figure might be glimpsed. Tall, graceful, with starlight in their eyes, watching for but a moment before vanishing like a dream. Legolas, true to his word, remained with Aragorn through the early years of his reign. But he too could not deny the call of the sea, and so it was that, in the later years of the Fourth Age, he built a grey ship in Ithilien and set sail, taking with him Gimli, the only dwarf to ever pass into the west. Of what befell them beyond the sundering seas, no tale tells, save that it is said they were welcomed beyond the circles of the world. Whether this was the final passage of the Eldar from Middle-earth, or whether a few others followed in the centuries to come, none can say. But of this there is no doubt, their time had passed, and the world would never be the same. And what of those who still wonder? What of those who walk the shores of Middle-earth, looking westward as the sun sinks beneath the waves? They will find no white ships upon the water, no sails catching the last golden light. But the memory of the elves lingers, like a song half remembered, a whisper carried upon the wind. For though the Eldar are gone, their footprints remain, in the hills and forests, in the ruins of ancient halls, in the names of rivers and mountains. And perhaps, if one listens closely on a still night, when the stars are bright and the world is hushed, they might hear, far away upon the wind, the last echo of an elven song, fading into the twilight of the world. Tolkien's decision to have the elves leave Middle-earth was not simply a narrative device, but a deeply thematic and philosophical choice that reflects his broader mythological structure. The fate of the elves, why they could not stay, is rooted in the very nature of their being, the purpose given to them by Eru Ilúvatar, and the unfolding history of Arda itself. From a deep analysis of Tolkien's texts, the following conclusions emerge. First, the elves were never meant to remain in Middle-earth permanently. Their original summons to Aman by the Valar in the Elder Days was a calling back to the divine realm, away from the encroaching darkness of Morgoth. Though many departed, those who remained, by choice or fate, were bound to suffer the slow decline of their kind. This is tied to what is known as the Doom of Mandos, spoken over the Noldor who rebelled and returned to Middle-earth. Their exile was not merely a punishment, but a prophetic utterance, setting forth the inevitable fading of the elves in the mortal lands. Another key reason for their departure lies in the fundamental difference between elves and men. The elves were bound to the world until its end. Their spirits, even in death, remained in Arda and did not depart beyond the circles of the world, unlike men who were given the gift of Ilúvatar. True death and the unknown fate beyond it. Over time, this difference became a burden. While men flourished and their kingdoms rose and fell, the elves could only watch as the world they had known and loved changed irreversibly. This is why the term fading is often associated with them. They did not age as mortals did, but their presence in the world grew thinner, their power less tangible, until they became little more than memories. Additionally, the destruction of the One Ring in The Lord of the Rings sealed their fate. The three rings of the elves, Velia, Narya, and Nenya, had preserved their lands against the decay of time, keeping Rivendell, Lothlorien, and the Grey Havens untouched by the slow ruin that overtook the rest of Middle-earth. With the One Ring gone, the power of the three also faded, and the last great havens of the elves began to diminish. The world was changing into one where elves could no longer thrive. The sea longing, instilled in them by Ulmo in the First Age, was another compelling force driving them west. It was not merely wanderlust, but a deep spiritual calling, a pull toward their true home in Aman. Even Legolas, who had once delighted in the forests of Middle-earth, felt it stir within him when he heard the gulls cry Dut. This longing ensured that even the most reluctant among them would eventually feel the need to depart. Finally, Tolkien's Catholic worldview deeply influenced this narrative. The elves symbolize an older, purer world, one of deep memory, beauty, and sorrow, that must give way to the age of men. In theological terms, the elves' departure can be seen as the withdrawal of divine grace from the world, leaving men to shape their own destiny. The bittersweet nature of their leaving reflects Tolkien's own views on the passing of an age, the loss of innocence, and the inexorable march of time. In conclusion, the elves could not remain in Middle-earth because it was not their true home. Their fate was bound to Aman, and their presence in the mortal lands was always meant to be temporary, however long that temporary lasted. As the world of men rose, the world of the elves had to fade, their beauty becoming legend, their songs turning to echoes. Their departure was not only an end, but also a fulfillment, a return to where they had always belonged, beyond the sunset, in the undying lands.